We've thrown the world into crisis, all because of Israel. Israel is driving all of this. Israel owns the Congress, thanks to its Zionist billionaires here in the United States in the lobby. And they own the White House, obviously, because there is no earthly reason why we should be at war with Iran.
But I found this picture of the U.S. Secretary of War, Pete Hegseth. I don't know if you've seen it or not.
I did.
But check out his tattoo. It's the same. He has the Jerusalem cross that was worn by the Crusaders. Do you think he's of the mindset of having a holy war in the Middle East?
Yes, he is.
And this is Netanyahu at the UN. He's holding up his image of greater Israel that was, first conceived by the father of political Zionism, Theodore Herzl. And the greater Israel is a term that comes from the Hebrew Bible, where they said that God gave Abraham and all his descendants the right to vast land from the brook of Egypt to the Euphrates. So that's what's driving this. It makes no sense to me. I mean, it's crazy for the U.S. to be behind this and all the genocide and everything.
So by taking out Karj Island, that's a big strike at China. What people aren't really focusing on here is the geopolitical brilliance of the president taking on Russia and China by going after Maduro and now going after Iran. This is the moment to reshape the geopolitical stage, and the president is doing it.
People claiming Israel controls the U.S. are either delusional or dishonest, and I'm primarily talking about people that pose as experts that are spreading this narrative around. Almost every single one of these people are the same people who told you last year that President Donald Trump and his administration were coming in to save America and save the world. They were leading a revolution. They were fighting the deep state. They were going to work together with multipolarism and usher in a bright new future for us all. They were 100% wrong about that. Nobody is twisting their arm to go to war. It was a foregone conclusion before President Trump even stepped foot into office. And not to control the Middle East, and that's that, but because it was a prerequisite for encircling both Russia and ultimately China. This is about primacy over the globe, not just primacy over the region, which is why people claiming Israel controls the United States, why this claim is absolutely, utterly ridiculous.
Welcome to What's Left, a weekly political discussion challenging the mainstream left. I'm Eduardo Barca with co-hosts, teacher and socialist Andy Lipson and socialist and community college maths professor Michael Hoffman. We're online at whatslleftpodcast.com. You can find that link to our site in the episode notes. You can also find my personal social media handle as at Don Eduardo Barca. Please subscribe to you, turn on your notifications, and share your favorite episode wherever you found this episode. We have merch as well. If you would fancy a shirt, contact us to our site at whatslleftpodcast.com. Thank you. And we have the Spanish version of What's Left as Queque de la Izquierda, which Andy keeps yelling me about, and I will continue editing. But I have an episode this week about Colombia and the elections with my friend Wilmer. So stay tuned for the Spanish language audience. All right, let's get going. Iran, Andy, take it away.
Well, before we go on to Iran, when are we going to see our next Spanish language version?
We have the elections happening, and some of the candidates have lost. Some of my friend Wilmer, who is going to discuss.
Okay.
So I'm going to destroy all his election hopes.
It's your job.
Good.
It's your job.
Good. Go for it, my friend. I bless that.
I understand where he's coming from. Go ahead.
So as people can see from both probably the title of this episode and the opener, we're going to just take up this question that I think is really important about why is the U.S. doing this, and what is Israel's connection to it, and taking up something that Brian Berletic expressed a lot of frustration with, and I understand that, that people are saying that the reason U.S. is doing Iran is, number one, it's crazy. Number two, we don't know why. And three, the only reason that can explain it is Netanyahu controlling Israel, Trump being, who's that? Adelson? Trump being paid $200 million by Adelson, being controlled by AIPAC, Congress and the White House being controlled by AIPAC, basically saying that U.S. foreign policy is run by Israel. And you know, it can lead from anything to an anti-Zionist framework around that, which I agree with, being, you know, against Zionism, to an anti-Jewish one, you know, like Jews control this, Jews control that, which that's the racist one. It's been done before, you know. It was wrong then, it was incorrect then, and it's incorrect now. But so I want to talk about that and talk about why that's incorrect, but why it matters. Brian Berletic thinks it's about people's ego. You know, like I want to, you know, like, and I don't think it's that. I actually think it runs much deeper. And I want to talk about why it is that people hold on to that. And so that's what I want to talk about today.
I think.
Oh, and in discussing it with you, Eduardo, I think there's another discussion to be had, which was, well, I think all of us agree that the U.S. runs the show, and that the U.S. is the dog and Israel is the tail. But I think there is a discussion to say as well, what's the relationship between those two then? Can Israel draw the United States into something that they don't want to do? Like, to what extent does Israel have control of the United States? You know, like, and I think that's a more complicated discussion, but I think it would be worth having as well. Because I think you and I might have some differences over that, but that's just a question of degree.
Well, I'm glad you made that distinction about are the Jews controlling the world? I mean, that's been kind of I've been hearing that, and for a very long time, it's also what gave rise to the Nazi movement. I mean, about the Jews. When I have these discussions with folks, they seem to they say it's anti-Semitic what I'm saying, and I make that distinction. The Israel state, the government, it's the people at the elite class who have formed groups like AIPAC that have long pushed for tougher U.S. sanctions on Iran, oppose nuclear deals. I mean, those are the people I'm targeting, not Jewish folk. Which,
Yeah.
unfortunately, I made this blood analysis of mine, which I now regret since Alison McDowell told us not to do such things. But, you know, there's even percentage of blood of my Jewish ancestry. Like the small percentage, I think it like, wow, we're so connected. I have no interest in attacking anyone's race or bloodline or DNA. Like, it has nothing to do with what we're talking about. Talking specifically, and thank you for saying that, like just specifically people who are in power and who happen to have a Jewish ancestry, maybe, but Israel leaders who have for a long time, and we talked about in the other Iran episode, like Netanyahu, who has addressed the US Congress and the US government for a very long time, pushing for this war to happen and finally having influence. I do think that there is an influence. And I do think that there are millions and millions of dollars lobbying Congress and the USA and in general and having ties to be able to do that. And I do credit, like I said, I think it's a symbiotic. We were on the phone, Andy, and it's a symbiotic relationship. It's not like it's just Israel ruling the world and they're the ones behind everything. I just think that they're very strong. I don't know how they do it. I mean, we can go delve into it, but I think they have invested lots of money into using Palestine as a lab for AI intelligence, selling Pegasus to Mexico as my country's was at one point #1 buyer of Pegasus, spying on the Zapatistas. Their technology is great. So is the US American technology, and so is China. But these countries have all symbiotically helped one another. And I think that that's where all this comes from. So I do think there's an influence. I'm not sure which one is stronger or what, but I think these shift over time. And I don't know what else to say except that that's my first statement. Yes, there is influence. You might say differently, Andy. I think that if we look at just strong, like the push I said earlier, then, I mean, That's what I see happening. And I don't know if you have something contrary to the point.
Well, let's let Michael say his thoughts on this, and then we'll get into, because even before we talk about influence, I would like to first make the case that the U.S. is running the show. And I think that's important to clarify, but that's it.
I mean, I'm going to make that case too, but I do think the exact nature of the relationship is between the U.S. and Israel is, the exact mechanisms of that relationship are interesting to explore in detail. But my gut response right now is that it's that's exactly what they want people to think. They want people to think that Israel is somehow conning the U.S., and they want people to think that Israel is dragging the U.S. into these things so that basically internally the reformists can say, look, if we just tweak the U.S. empire from within, it'll be a good empire. I mean, that's literally what liberals in the U.S. are trying to make the case for right now. They don't even have to do it explicitly because the anti-imperialist voice, anti-imperialist organization is so weak and quiet relatively in the United States. But I really strongly feel the way to understand Israel is that after World War II, the West saw an opportunity to build an outpost for the West's influence. This was basically Europe basically organized an armed colony, and it's always been essentially an armed colony of the West. And you can tell that because of where their money and their guns come from. Without Europe, and then after 1967, without the United States, Israel could not function or exist. And that's not because the U.S. And so there's this other theme that I find so infuriating, that people somehow project incompetence onto the world's most powerful empire, right? And they really try to, this actually just infuriating the way that people don't see past the surface show, even though we know, like, the media shows us lies and politicians say one thing just so that you will believe the wrong. I mean, they're liars. And so looking at the material power of the United States, they are not incompetent. They're not dragged into some impulsive war. How could they possibly be as powerful as they are if every election there was some crazy guy that made these like crazy decisions? It ignores the fact that there are thousands of people employed by the U.S. empire whose whole job is to make sure that it stays in power. The people who decide what actually happens with the guns and the bombs and the ships, they're part of a highly organized, top-down, highly structured organization that does not change at election time. It's just absurd to think that somehow we could be like, oh, we got tricked. It doesn't make any material sense, because if you look at the amount of investment in this whole thing, not just in the military side of it, because the military side of it is intimately tied to the economic power. And now it's interesting because now they're saying things that this Iran war is about the return of U.S. Energy dominance. That's a term that an official used, right? This is not about anything other than U.S. hegemony over the whole planet. And we can tell that by reading their internal documents, that that they plan out these things, and then the administration who's in power is the one who sells it. They do, probably shape timing, right? There's political timing that has to happen, but the actual execution of these plans could not happen without years of preparation and planning. But I do want to acknowledge that it is it's understandable why people might be confused if all you see is sort of the facade of internal politics. But I feel like rapidly you become unconfused when you think about the actual material world and all the other things that the U.S. is involved in and the actual structure of U.S. power. They don't, yeah.
Yeah.
Israel is a proxy of the United States.
Yeah, and the quote was from Alexander Haig in 1981. General Alexander Haig put it bluntly: Israel is the largest American aircraft carrier in the world that cannot be sunk. And that's the conservative Republican basically being very clear, that they understand that these are their forward troops in one region that essentially will shed their blood rather than American blood. And you can see in Ukraine how the U.S. uses proxies to basically try to weaken their enemies, weaken their competitors, I should say, Russia or China. And they would much rather shed, as Lindsey Graham said, best money spent in Russia, when he said, how many Russian soldiers are being killed. And now he didn't say the other part about like, well, now the Ukrainians get to shed their blood for it. We don't have to. But that's the idea, is like, how do you get, and that's not just true for Israel. It's not just true for Ukraine. It's true for Europe. It's true for Taiwan. It's true for Japan. It's true for South Korea. Everywhere the U.S. it's true for Mexico. Everywhere the U.S. has penetrated influence, it's going to be part of the shield of Americas is going to be, how do you get South American blood to be shed for U.S. empire? And how do you make those territories the place where the war is fought? Like how, and it's also true with as we're seeing now with the Bahrain and Saudi Arabia and Qatar and all these regions. These are all various stages of forward bases for the U.S. to project its power and to limit the reach of its competitors. I'll share this, and this is why, I mean, because let's be clear that what people are claiming is that AIPAC or Israel or Netanyahu is controlling U.S. foreign policy. U.S. foreign policy in Iran, in relationship to Iran, is not separate from U.S. foreign policy in relationship to the globe. That's one of the fundamental mistakes people are making when they may even go as far as saying like Israel is controlling this. I mean, this is the U.S. is a global empire. That's why it has Northcom and Southcom and PACOM, Pacific Command, Eurocom, CENTCOM. CENTCOM is the one that includes Israel and Iran and Saudi Arabia and region. What is it called? South Asia, I guess it would be Southwest Asia, and AFRICOM. In all these regions, there are military bases across the globe that have U.S. troops there and U.S. stuff to help them control those regions, make sure markets are open for them, make sure Western imperial economic interests can expand as much as they want. And when the U.S. talks about China as a pacing competitor, what they are talking about is not something that's in direct competition yet to its military structure, but they're talking about the penetration of Chinese economic structure into South America, into Africa, into the Southeast Asia, Middle East, largely through Iran and through the fact that the U.S. has lost, in Afghanistan and Iraq, which has led to Iran's influence growing, which they read as China's influence as growing. This is the reason for the Ukraine war, to keep Russia at bay, so that Russia's influence in relationship to Europe can be minimized. That's why they wanted to seal that off. And so what the U.S. is doing in this tiny little region here is completely connected to controlling their global empire. And why is that so? Is because what, Michael, you were talking about, because so much energy. This little region right in here is largely the energy source for all this entire globe. It's not the only part. Obviously, it's from Russia, from South America, even from North America. There's energy, but a major lever point for control is right here. And so to have an aircraft carrier, an unsinkable aircraft carrier in that region that will shed its blood for your cause, that will spend some of its treasure, is like that's easy money to spend. If you could spend just that money, billions, tens of billions, even hundreds of billions of dollars to control much of the globe's energy, then that's money well spent for the U.S. empire. And so I think people have to remind themselves about what the U.S. project is. And there's no way that they're going to say, like, oh, Israel gets to decide what we do in Taiwan. Israel gets to decide what we do in South America. Israel gets to decide what we do in Ukraine or Russia. If Israel was deciding, they'd say, fuck that. We're not going to let you waste money on Taiwan. We're going to defend our interests. It's like the U.S. would not, if Israel was deciding U.S. interests, Israel would basically say, pull out of Taiwan, pull out of this. We want you to like be our BITCH here in this region to just help us control this. It just wouldn't work if Israel truly controlled it, then that's how it would work. Now, so why does AIPAC exist? Well, in some ways, if it's an aircraft carrier, there are rumors that U.S. troops, soldiers, I think it was I don't know if it was the Abraham Lincoln or the U.S. Ford, were not so happy with being done with this, and they were plugging up toilets on the aircraft carrier. Okay, do I know that happened? I don't know, but it could happen. It could happen that your soldiers don't want to go, so they steer the damn thing back, or they plug up the toilets and make it not work. Such a thing could happen. You don't want the soldiers that you're sending into a combat zone to be that unhappy. You want to be attending to their interests to make sure that yes, you are going to be shedding your blood, like U.S. soldiers will be shedding your blood for U.S. capitalists, but we need to make sure that you're happy in doing that. We need to make sure that you're content with that project and you're psychologized to go on that project. And so AIPAC, in part, is a really important device for sensing unease, sensing unhappiness, and to make sure that we always have a bloodline to you in the same way that a mother has an umbilical cord to a child. You want to make sure that you have an ongoing relationship, because Israel is a special ally. It is among all its proxies, it's probably got the tightest relationship to the United States because it's centered in a region that is so tightly related to the U.S. controlling the region. And now if people think the U.S., I believe the U.S. is, quote, losing in Iran right now, or things are not going as well as they want. But look, they're about to go into Karg Island. And Karg Island, they may be the basis by which Iran has to destroy all the oil and then destroy all the oil of its allies or of the U.S. allies in the region. Who do you think is hurt most if the Middle East goes up in flames? United States or China? China. China is hurt way worse than that. So the U.S. don't give a shit, and it's not dumb. They are willing. Look at what's happening in Michael's background there. The U.S. is willing to do that to the entire region in order for it, knowing that will hurt China level 10 and it'll hurt United States level 4. That's a win. That's a win for these motherfuckers. They'll burn it all down. And they also know that if they have to, Israel may be the guy who delivers the nukes to Iran to make sure that quote, Israel doesn't lose. Where do you think those nukes are coming back to? Washington, D.C. or Tel Aviv? They're going to Tel Aviv. The U.S. knows that they're willing to sacrifice all that population, the Jews there, the Christians there, the Arabs there, for the U.S. to basically come out on top. They don't need the globe to be a safe place. They just need to make sure that they're on the top of the fucking flames when the thing goes down. That's it. That's what it means to be an empire. And that's what it means to be a capitalist empire. And those are the rules of imperialism when you have a competitive situation like capitalism. And I get, and And Brian Berletic thought it was ego that led people to not want that. It's not ego. It's fear and despair and not willing to understand how dangerous this world we live in is. People do not want to believe that this is where this is going. They want to believe that Rothschild is controlling it and won't let it go there, and they'll just put us in a panopticon. That's not what's happening. This is an uncontrolled train that has only one destination unless you have a working class revolution. And it leads to the fires of hell that you see in Michael's little background. All right. And people don't want to believe that. And I get it because during COVID, we saw people not want to believe a lot of things. Doesn't mean it's not true, though. It is unfortunately very true that the United States is taking us on a road to hell. And unless we have a revolution here in the United States, we're not getting off it. So that's my thing to say about this.
I mean, I agree that, I think in the very beginning, if we look at Israel and the USA's relationship from the very beginning, when Israel established itself in the Middle East, there was Israel proved themselves worthy to have fought, what was it, the 6-Day War? There were several. There was several defeats of nearby Arab neighbors that proved themselves to be worthy. And the greatest threat at that time, back when the Soviet Union had its strong influence, was Soviets. I think so. And that's what was the USA's enemy. So as you mentioned that, as you showed that map, I could see how much influence I was encroaching, that you need to have, who was it that the quote was, the aircraft in the Middle East?
Alexander Haig, the
I
unsinkable
think
aircraft carrier. Yeah.
so visual, I could see that, and you do have Israel as a strong, what do you call it there? The frontline base that you need as a powerful anti-Soviet ally in the region. And so I think that persists. But I don't undermine Israel's influence over time. I think it's also grew and made itself a nation of itself to prove themselves as strong and as competitive to be able to harness some influence there. What you have described, though, makes perfect sense to me. I don't have a strong or not like a position. I think what makes me think of or wonder is around Israel is their like, how do they develop? So what is it like? Is it the US's support of pouring in billions of dollars to be able to fund the development of cyber warfare? They have such a strong military and intelligence development that I think that they have even sold to the USA, that I don't think that is just like that's how I think that they have also on their own been able to prove themselves as and people hold themselves. I mean, they still need that cooperation, that alliance, but I don't want to undermine their power. And I think it's also, this is where I think it's also considerably dangerous to not support Israel and their demands, because they could otherwise, given how much they have developed, be aligned with someone like Russia or China. And that's why I say that they have to sort of bend over to Israel, because since they have also grown, maybe they were taken under the USA's arm, but they've also been they're now grown. They're considered as a strong nation. That the danger is if they don't get what they want and they're not spoiled, could they eventually align themselves with other Eastern powers that could turn on the USA? So that's why I think it's not just that they're just manipulating them. I mean, the USA is using them, but they're also afraid of not sticking by them when you have other countries that might say, "Hey, the USA is not bending over to you. I have lots of things to offer you."
I do think you're raising an important piece, which is like, what is like a really solid, satisfying explanation of AIPAC and of Israel as its own separate entity, which I do think we can be stronger on explaining that. And my explanation for that would be so when we think of AIPAC, I think of people within the United States, right? These are capitalists who are directly tied to the Israeli aspect of U.S. imperialism. And you're correct to point out that it proved itself, and that, it's the 67, since the 1967 war. So in 1948, it was supposed to be just like a British project. Then they expelled Palestinians and fought neighboring Arab states to establish themselves. And then 67 is when they essentially put down all of the neighboring Arab armies and essentially set back the concept of Arab nationalism for a generation. I mean, and it is at that point that the U.S. started heavily investing in Israel. So that is correct. Like, the U.S. had to be in a specific position before it started massively investing in Israel. But Israel has to, and I think it's hard to understand or hard to overstate that Israel has to be aligned with the interests of the West. I don't believe that a multipolar world, or like somehow China stepping in, would actually be good for Israel, because it's also not good for the neighboring Arab states. So I want to talk about the neighboring Arab states, which is the neighboring Arab states. It's very important for them to be able to make it seem like Israel is driving things, because the neighboring Arab states, like, all the Gulf states, UAE, Qatar, Oman, Saudi Arabia, they are also fundamentally tied to U.S. imperialism, meaning the financial system as it exists now. China and BRICS was trying to develop, a sort of alternative. But as it exists right now, you have ruling elites in that entire region who are committed to the same financial system, and therefore the same power structure that the U.S. is at the head of. And the most clear symbol of that is the fact that international trade has to be done in a U.S. dollar, right? So the whole dollar diplomacy, or like the petrodollar, that is actually super important to see as a signifier of U.S. dominance. That is the in a way, you can think of it as like the U.S. is doing all of this to maintain its financial primacy and to not allow any alternative to develop. And while it started to develop, this has now set back that project of an alternative financial world order. And all of those, and all of the, the leaders in the Arab world really want to make it seem like, oh, it's just Israel for their own populations, because they're is the Arab street hates the fact that Israel has just completely embarrassed the concept of Arab nationalism over and over again. And the real thing that has sold out Arab nationalism is the structural link between Arab elites and the world financial system. And basically, they're getting rich. They don't want to stop getting rich. And you can say the same thing about the elites who are deeply tied to Israel in the United States. I do not think that there is some threat. And this is an interesting question because I used to think that more. I used to think the US might be afraid of, China, taking over support for Israel, but I'm not sure that really explains what's happening because I don't think a change or a shift in global finance would allow a lot of these people to stay on top. So I feel like you have to see how committed people are to continue to make money the way that they're making money now. And that in the end means that people are all committed to this thing. So like AIPAC serves as and I think it's interesting, Andy's description, and I would say that's how I've thought of it now, which is just that AIPAC is it's like the guidance system coming from it's like they basically tell the US how to continue to shape the narrative, right? There is an interaction that has to happen, and AIPAC is the political wing. And what do they mostly work on? They mostly work on trying to sell Israel as a good thing. So AIPAC is much more, to me, about internal US politics. They work on how they're like, hey, you guys, you got to be careful. You really got to push back on this anti-Israel stuff, but the Gaza stuff has set that back a little bit. But materially, what's happening now is the US empire is getting its way. It's destroying the basis for any alternative economic system, right? It's economic financial system. It's destroying the basis for China developing another pole of the world financial system. That's to me the most accurate way to conceptualize it, because that's what explains why they had all these plans about an oil blockade, and we should go through some of the those papers that Brian Berletic shows us. That's they actually have been talking about an oil blockade on China for decades. Mm-hmm. And which path to Persia, that paper that goes through the laundry list of things that they've actually done to Iran is also about U.S. energy dominance and U.S. Preventing Iran from developing its relationship with China. So I covered a lot of stuff, but there's some interesting questions to explore. And I feel like I need perhaps better ways to explain it to people who are really focused on AIPAC, because AIPAC is a lot of freaking money. It's a significant force in U.S. politics. And I would say that it's a significant force in U.S. politics because the U.S. has to have this political mechanism to sell it back to people, because they know it's not on its face they know U.S. empire is not popular. So they have to have internal mechanisms for selling it to people.
Eduardo, see if you have any questions on that come up for you, and then I'll respond.
I think you should. I don't have anything right now.
Well, so I think one of the things that is true for it was true for the Diem government in Vietnam when they were being used to project, to basically be the communist fighting domino in Vietnam. I'm sure it's true for the Zelensky government in Ukraine. It's true for the Netanyahu government in Israel. It's true for the Sheinbaum government in Mexico. All of them know to some extent that the empire needs them. They know that, like, or rather, is trying to use them, and they want to know to what are the limits? What are the limits to which I can bend their need of us to make it work for our will? It's the same things that socialists who go into the union movement basically say, how am I going to how can I get this? What deals can I get for people below me, workers below me? Kind of, it's like that kind of calculation they make as I know that I've got that I'm dealing with something bigger than me, but how can I bend it to make it work for my will? I do believe that Israel probably has the most credits to do such kind of work. Much more than Zelensky, much more than Diem, much more than Scheinbaum. I actually do believe that Israel, because of the importance of oil for U.S. control of the globe, that's why that is the basis by which Israel has some leverage to say we can push the U.S. farther than its other proxies. But I just think it's important to understand that, Eduardo, if you and I had a relationship, and you and I were going together in the world, and I have a gun in my hand, and all you have is your fists, and if it came down to it, if you wanted me to do something, you could punch me, and if I wanted you to do something, I could shoot you. Then as we walk forward in the world, you are doing what I tell you. That's the way that is, right? I mean, that's just the reality. Is if we're walking together in the world and all you have is your fists and I have a gun, then essentially you're going to do what I say that I tell you to do, and I'm not going to do what you tell me to do. That's just the nature of the thing. And that's the situation Israel and all the proxies across the globe face with the United States, because they are proxies. And it's just what I pointed out. The U.S. is not dependent on Israel. The U.S. control of the globe is dependent on the U.S. control of the oil. So when the oil goes away, when that oil goes away, then the U.S. no longer needs Israel. That's why Tel Aviv is going to end in a thermonuclear husk, because the exit strategy for U.S. out of its competition with China, if it can't control that oil, it will be no one controls that oil. No one. That oil is gone. And the U.S. will live with the consequences of that, because it believes it can survive, but it doesn't think China can survive. So at the end of the day, the U.S. is going to sacrifice Israel. And it's already prepared. And the way we know that is it allowed it to keep a nuclear bomb. It allows it to have a nuclear bomb because it's planning on having Israel be the first one who does a nuclear bomb in that region. And then it's going to sacrifice Tel Aviv for that. It's not giving the nuke to Israel to protect Israel. It's giving the nuke to Israel to protect the U.S. interests, so that it makes sure it controls the globe, and it can irradiate that region instead of irradiating Washington or San Francisco. And it doesn't care about the fact that we die out of those things being irradiated, because we know they got bunkers for themselves at the end of the day. But that's a separate point. So that's the relationship. It is only symbiotic in that, well, the United States is best served to govern and rule the world through its proxies. But that's been true for empires throughout. The U.S. is the grandest global empire of all time, in terms of its military and economic penetration. But that penetration is now being curbed by another competitor. And that competitor is not Israel. It's China. And it's not Iran, it's China. And I actually do believe that had history worked a different way, Russia has been trying to develop relationships. There was a point where Soviet Union was trying to control Israel in the same way that U.S. It just didn't work out that way. It just history went a different way. And I do believe that Russia has tried to maintain relationships with Israel. And in fact, there have been discussions between Putin and Netanyahu during all this Ukraine stuff and even this Iran stuff. Well, I don't know about Netanyahu during the Iran stuff, but I do know during the Ukraine stuff. But because capitalism is growing in its crisis, it means the poles are growing. Like, it just means things become polarized. And now the die is cast. Israel has now, by virtue of it joining U.S. directly in the military project of taking on China, because that's what's happening in Iran. The U.S., I mean, Israel has joined the United States directly in a military intervention to attack China. Well, now it's over. Now Iran is you can slide that piece over to the U.S. side. It's not going back until after World War III. Once World War III is complete, we can look and see how the things will shake out. But up into the solving of the resolution of World War III and wherever that leads us right now, or not right now, forever until that point, Israel is with the United States because of the decisions that are being made now. Are there other countries in play that might be different? India is one that looks like in play. I don't think Europe is in play, or much of Europe. I think France and Germany are going to find themselves, like Israel, being the next ground that will be irradiated before Europe, like before United States does. So that's why the biggest concentration of bases is in Germany, not in the Middle East or anything like that, for U.S. bases, and that's where they plan on putting intermediate nuclear weapons. That Russia has said, if you do that, they threatened to use their fucking hypersonic Orezhniks to say no. Who do you think that threat? Does that threaten the United States? No. That means Germany is going to be an irradiated husk. So none of these people are they are all sacrificing themselves at the altar of the U.S. capitalist interests, and that's them. And Russia and China is stuck with that. Russia and China do not have the proxy relationships that U.S. has with that has grown its network over the globe. And that's what the U.S. is leveraging. It's like, I have a bunch of fools that will kill themselves for us, and you don't have as many fools that will kill themselves for you. I think we got a pretty good handle on that basis. And I think that is true for the United States. And I will say, the thing you've mentioned about Mossad, and, I showed this article or I didn't show it to Michael, but you and I know about Pfizer and COVID, right, Eduardo? And how literally Pfizer was talking about the Israeli population as a test tube to test their vaccine on, prior to them even being used on the American population. So this is how Israel sacrifices itself, not just into the future, but in the present. It literally says, use us as you will, as long as you keep us as the people we become enriched. We'll defend you. We'll do anything for you. We'll kill our population for you. That is not Israel controlling the United States. That is the Israeli population and Israel being a plaything for U.S. Western interests. We just see it time and time again. And I think for people to misunderstand that relationship, like Michael says, it lets all our politicians off the hook. It makes it seem like you can just unelect these people and go that way. But really what it does is it preserves the illusion that this thing could be controlled through the system itself. It can't. This is an uncontrollable train of a capitalist system that has only one solution, which is revolution. And because people don't either believe, like Brian Berletic does not believe revolution is possible, and most people don't even think about that. They think communism and working class revolution is antithetical to something they want. I'm like, I don't know. That's the kind of notion. And then you have people like me who I can't see how the working class is going to make it happen. It's a pretty grim pick. I think the reason people hold to Israel so much is because the alternative would be to believe in the impossible. And that's a scary thought. And it is scary. And what am I going to do? That's just the way the world is.
Yeah, I have been focused on this very frustrating narrative that the U.S. doesn't have a plan. Oh, Trump doesn't know what he's doing. And there are factions in the military specifically complaining about the communication that's occurring around the war. But never have I heard any single one of these, like NPR, liberals, or even, anyone in the Democratic Party fundamentally question the idea that the US should have energy dominance, fundamentally question the idea that Iran is somehow a bad guy. And it's maddening to me that people focus on this surface level politics and say, like, oh, it's just Trump is crazy, it's for his ego. And the main thing that's hiding is the completely unanimous commitment to the whole US empire project.
Yep.
Of the US ruling class. And to me, I'm now, it's just been driven home how delusional it is to think that people who are committed to that US empire project are somehow going to deliver some meaningful internal social gains to the US working class. Like, you think that people who are committed to US dominance and therefore have to essentially shrug their shoulders at the genocide in Gaza, shrug their shoulders at the bombing of Tehran, shrug their shoulders at the complete destruction now of South Lebanon. They're like, oh, well, their only criticism is like, oh, he didn't go to Congress first. Oh, he's not respecting international law. They're not saying, wow, maybe we shouldn't dominate the world. They're saying that if we just get a good person up at the top of the empire, maybe this could be okay. And they think that the same people tied to that US imperial project might be kinder to immigrants. They might be kinder to women in the United States. They might somehow help the working class in the United States a little more. This is why I've appreciated Greg Stoker around this issue, who's a veteran, I think he's running for running for Congress or something in Texas. But he's basically, he's saying that this is not a war that has something to do with, like, it's not a religious war or even a territorial war between Israel and Iran. This is a global class war. And that is actually, to me, a model of the situation that I feel like is the most accurate at predicting what's happening next. It ties what's happening externally with what's happening internally. And, it sounds maybe cliche or old, but that is the best way to describe it. This is a global class war, and the class divisions are not bottled up inside these national boundaries. Like, there are oligarchs in Russia who are also tied to US imperialism. There are elites everywhere in the world who are tied to US imperialism. This is not going to be explained to you in some clear way from the boss's media. From, like, they are not going to break it down for you like that. They're going to make you think it's about this or that bullshit because they want you to believe there's something salvageable within this project. But there's not. The economic crisis that is developing is driving this race for domination. That is what's happening. And they really just want to maintain their power and ability to extract profits from the whole world. That's what this is about. And it is a scary thought. You made me realize, Andy, like, I know maybe we're so intense sometimes. We're like destroying people's illusions by pointing out structural facts. We're like destroying all the illusions everybody clings to. And what Brian Berletic does is he ignores the economic side of it, I think, but he also gets frustrated. Like, people aren't listening to him. And it's like, that's never how it's worked. Like, right. you actually have to organize people to fight for specific demands tied to that analysis, or else, and that's what we do not have. And I don't think they're afraid of people saying that, as long as we're not connecting elected and effectively organized.
Yep. Yeah. I mean, you and I know, Michael, in terms of talking to liberals about the Democratic Party, talking to people about, say, the prison system at times, or these various things people are willing to really not let go of, like regardless of the contradictions you can point out, and that they move the goalposts all the time. And it's like, wait, what are you doing with all these different arguments you make? Every time I show you that the thing you're holding on to doesn't exist, you just go somewhere else. And we're confounded by that. And that is because that's not how people's minds are changed. Like, one, it is important for them to cling to that because it holds on to something that is all they have. But the absence of a way for the working class to organizationally express the process of its own liberation, the absence of something on the ground that even suggests that there could be another way, means that people's minds are just going to stay in that place until there's something physically that exists that we can be part of or point to that says, hey, maybe that would work. If in the absence of that, why would people? Of course, people are going to keep their brains tethered to these balloons because it's the only thing they got. It's the only thing we have. It's just not the way I see the world, and it's the curse of Marxism, I would say, in some ways. It's like, if you really wanted to. I'm glad, like, we talk about how dangerous hope is, and that's why I say that, like, because true hope has to be tethered to something that actually can get you out of the problem. If your hope is that just one more drink is going to make you feel better, and you're an alcoholic, you're screwed. You are screwed, and so you have to find the real way, and that's all. I think that's all we're saying is. There's no real way here. But when we point out what the real way could be, they go, well, where is that? Where is that happening? And they go, nowhere. Like, I'm not even part of it. And they go, then what the fuck are you talking to me about for? Like, you're just ruining my day. And that's, I don't know what to tell you. I mean, I understand that, but something's going to have to shift. And really, who said that? The idea of Israel being like a colony, and it made me think about the American Revolution, because if the Israeli working class rose up and said, Netanyahu, fuck the United States, be done with that, they're going to just sell us down the river, and like did like that American Revolution relative to the crown. That to me, something meaningful would happen there. Like, to me, then I'm starting to be like, okay, I don't see that happening, but. Just like the soldiers who refused to fight on the aircraft carrier, if the Israeli working class said, I'm no longer going to be part of your project because you're going to light our whole community on fire with your nukes, not your nukes, but Pakistani nukes or Russian nukes that will then be lobbed into Tel Aviv if Tel Aviv makes the decision to do it into Tehran, because that's how it's going to go. Whether or not Iran has nukes doesn't matter. Allies have already agreed that we're not going to let you go without a fight, and for sure that's what's going to happen. Like, and so if Israeli workers could recognize that they're being sacrificed at the altar of the U.S. and say we want out, I think something interesting could happen then. But I don't see that.
I feel like that's the last place it would happen.
And that's the ideological part. The part of it that when in the opener about like Hegseth having that brand with the tattoo, the religious war and things like that. That religious zealotry, whether it be a Christian one or a Jewish one or a Muslim one, it can be, really is very effective to drive people to go completely against their interests and not break from the dependency that they have to empire.
Right. Well, and to Eduardo's point, Israel was probably one of the most successful colonial projects. It's also like one of the last, I think it's like the last modern colony that that exists as a colony in that way. But it really has been extremely successful. And so because it because of the combination of ideas that help sustain it as a project in people's minds, combined with the complete subsidization of Israeli society, like, I just think a break in the Israeli working class, I'm with the people who think like that's way less likely to me than like a working class revolution in the United States, because you don't have the same kind of class development.
Yeah.
In the United States, we started out very much like Israel, but through class struggle, we developed, different layers of society that have some sense of their own rights that can be critical. But even here in the belly of this empire, we're so heavily propagandized. I just think it's not likely here, and it's even less likely in Israel. So
you are right to tie our histories to similar colonial projects that led to wiping out, either the attempt to wipe out an indigenous population or a native population, a population that was there before you, or our past, which is very much one that pretty much finished off. Like, people are alive, they're Native Americans today, but that they have been successfully defeated, for all intents and purposes. And then people, when they talk about revolution in this country, they often go, well, what are we going to do? Are we going to give those lands back? Like, those questions start to come up, and it comes up as as almost a bounded limit. Like, can we really do that? Will I have to? And it's like, all these questions are going to have to come. I do believe, actually, a real revolution will require taking up those questions and having an answer for those questions of not just the present, but that past. And I think people don't want to deal with that. And but that's what we're going to have to deal with in order to go on into a truly humane new world. I don't think there's going to be a statute of limitations that says that's too long ago. That's that long ago. Now that one doesn't have to be solved. I do believe we're going to have some answers for why we just said, why don't you go live in that desert?
I got a nice piece of Holy Land for you.
Right. Right.
And lots of guns.
Yeah. But also the desert that we've put our own native populations in.
Right.
So
right. Sorry. Yeah.
No. But they're like, it's like weird rhymes happening in history.
Yeah. No, and I feel like that has been super important for me, making that connection, in situating my own understanding of my own development, because I was born into a violent, racist, colonial mindset. And you can see the way that the culture that I came from was forged intentionally to essentially adapt to this colonization project and now this imperial project. And that I had to consciously break from the culture that was developed in order to sustain this imperial project, which would not exist without the initial colonial project. Right. And so when I talk to Zionists about it, it's like, no, I came from that kind of culture too. You can actually critically analyze it and break from it. Mm-hmm. I was told that the Native Americans they just threw their trash everywhere, and they would, basically that they were savages. And when it came down to it, there was a war and the Indians lost. What are you going to do? And that, Africans were better off because they were enslaved, and all that mythology that also tied directly into, and one of the best things you can do is serve in the military. And one of the, we should be in awe of like the U.S. military power. We should be proud to be part of that power. And, behind it is dehumanizing violence, but it also dehumanizes the people within it on purpose. And it's also clear to me why, in a way, it's clear to me why people are so stuck within this illusion, because it's an illusion of the empire that there's no other alternative. There is no real way other than this particular power structure. And if you imagine somehow large scale changes, then you're really the tyrant, right? This is the anti-communism was to make people who were basically saying we should have fundamental needs met in our society to make them out to be the tyrants, right? And that's essentially what internal politics is still. It's still like if you're demanding too much, then you're actually a scary bad tyrant. And yeah, I don't know what to do about it. I guess the last thing I wanted to say was my imagination for something being different comes from the past. Without reading and connecting like events and analysis of history to events today, I wouldn't have an imagination that things could be different either. So in a way, that's where ideas do come into play, but they don't. But like you said, people don't change their mind without having something tangible. But they also need some connection to the past in order to understand what's possible. I don't know. That's the other problem or conundrum. Anyway, I wanted to ask one other thing, which was.
Can I see if Eduardo?
Okay, I'll just stop there. Sorry.
Yeah, can I see if Eduardo has anything?
I don't have much to add to this discussion. I'm just listening and reflecting.
So, to me, it's very clear the U.S. has a plan. How would we characterize that plan in Iran then to people?
Well, I think the U.S. war on Iran is its next stage of its war on China. That's how I would describe it.
So what are they really trying to accomplish?
Energy, just trying to strangle China's access to energy to break its ability to spread its empire while preserving U.S. ability to project its empire, believing that it has more energy independence than China does. And it makes sense to me. I think that's a winning strategy. And I do think that the United States believes that if they let things carry on as they are, China is developing faster than the U.S. can keep up with. So time is not on their side. They have to act. The longer they wait on all of this, the more China has a chance of overtaking the United States economically and then militarily. So I believe the U.S. has to put a brake on this fairly quickly. That's why I believe that they're willing to watch that entire region burn before they will lose. They will not lose in Iran. That's my belief. Because if they lose in Iran, then it's over for the United States. Like that, then the things just topple quicker. So the U.S. will have to burn that entire region before they leave within a loss. And that's why even people like the guy, Douglas McGregor there, who has illusions like that, all of them are already going like, wait, this looks like more like, now they're all saying this is much more likely that Tel Aviv or Israel is going to be sending a nuke on Iran. Like they're all talking that way now. And yeah, that's where this goes. Because the U.S. won't do it. It's going to be Israel that sends the nukes. Tactical nukes.
Brian Berletic frames it as all the U.S. has to do is destroy a lot of things, and then it can pause and retool. Iran is in a much more desperate situation, which means that the likelihood that it will pause, even if the U.S. tries to pause it now, may not be good. But the U.S. depends on a pause. And if they invade Karg Island, and then Karg Island is where it's the main oil production hub, right? Is that
Yeah.
where the refinement is, or is that where everything gets kind of loaded
I
onto
think it's like
transportation?
90% of the oil gets transported from there. I don't know where, and I've seen those big old surround things, but I think it's about getting the oil onto a ship. Carg Island is a major part of it. That's my belief.
Right. And it's like a huge portion of the world's oil supply
Right.
passes through Park Island, or it's almost all of Iran's oil goes through Karg Island, and then most of the world's oil has to pass through the Strait of Hormuz,
Yeah.
which they are now actually attacking ships. It's what was never totally clear to me how Iran would actually physically close the Strait of Hormuz. Now I'm seeing that is actually more of a military action.
Yep.
So the capability of Iran to blow ships up is still apparently intact, and is also a key piece strategically of them maintaining any kind of leverage over the US. And at first I wanted to say, like, at first the Strait of Hormuz stayed open just fine, and it was actually insurance. I mean, this was one of the interesting parts of the story, is that it was actually Lloyd's insurance company that basically said, like, uh-oh, it's wartime, we can't insure your ships anymore. That's what led first to essentially a stop of Strait of Hormuz traffic. But I mean, then that to me is just so fascinating, especially when, US elites are like, oh, it's Iran closing the thing. It's like, no, it's not. No. There's something there about, like, capitalists needing stability to make their money, but they also need to destroy other people's shit to keep on top.
Yeah.
So yes, I think what's happening right now regionally in Northern Africa and Eastern Europe is about, you had a map once, Andy, where you showed us clearly, almost like a clear linear line, where there was the division between the world powers in this global stage of what needed to happen in proxy wars, in its strong division to be able to hold power on the world. Not this unison that some people might think, but I mean, it was so clear, that map that you showed us, from Ukraine down to Iran.
Oh yeah. In a previous episode, to basically
Yeah.
show that, like, there's
You
almost
might
a
want to show that
line
map
that
when you do
carries
the
on.
edits.
Yeah.
And so I know it has to, sorry, there's a bunch of cat hair all over. So I know that this is about a war chess game, a geopolitical game to hold on to power. It's a competitive capitalist stage. Yes, I got that clear. And what I also know is that there are resources that are fought for. Resources of land, resources of oil, resources of water, resources, all kinds of resources. And I think oil is at the top. And so I don't want to dismiss that there's also this fight for oil. But I would like to consider that in the future episode that we can further explore how sustainable that resource is, because I think that's also another driving factor for why we're into these wars, trying to find a way to hold on to these reserves. And our dependence on it is just, I'm just like, how long are we able to, as a human race, unless we die in the next 20 years, or in 20 years from now, are we able to hold on to this resource? So if we just put aside the geopolitical chess game that exists and we now talk about resources, what are we going to do? And how is that ongoing scrambling for the control of that resource going to do to us in the future? So I think there's only, I forgot, I saw there's this scarcity. And so I think that that's why we're there as well, not just there because Russia's influence in China. And so I worry, maybe this is we're diverting a bit, and if you think that we should discuss this on a separate episode, that's fine. How do we then survive as a society when that resource is going to be slowly more and more just limited? And I think Cuba is a project where I think that that's being seen right now, that they are doing what little they can to survive without it, with little ships being, Mexico shipping, I think Canada was trying to help with food. But anyhow, and so that's a concern I keep coming up with my mind. I'll stop there so both of you can respond to that if you want.
I mean, I have a thought on responding to that, but Michael, do you want to go first or? Okay. Well, first off, I don't think there's any existing alternative like Cuba. There is no existing alternative that truly answers the question of not just because what I hear you asking is, aside from the falling rate of profit under capitalism that is leading to these nation states colliding with each other to some gigantic catastrophe, there's also what seems to be a material limit humanity is facing, right? And that is true, actually. And Jeff Strahl talks about that a lot as another feature. And it's an aspect of what I think is a part of the developing crisis. The thing I would say is I don't think I know the answer to how we solve that question. Because I don't know what society needs to look like to truly solve it. All I know is that capitalism can't answer that question and can only accelerate through that problem. It tries to go faster as a means of dealing with material limit, which only exacerbates the crisis. Revolution would mean a real global revolution would mean humans would slow it down, we'd have to slow it down and say, okay, and take a stock of what we have to figure out how do we carry forward. And that means we would eliminate the profit system. We would say we're not going to use the making of profit as the base of production for how we decide what we do together. We talk with each other and confer with each other about it. But what that looks like, I have no idea. All I know is that is the only way that a solution might be made, which is to look actually at what all the stuff in your pantry and say, how are we going to go from here to there with that together? And revolution is how you do that. But I don't have an answer for that question in the same way that I don't have an answer for what do we do about all the societies that were undone in this last era of hundreds to 200 or 300 years. How do we carry forward with them into our revolution? I don't have an answer for that. I just know that if we don't take up that question, I don't believe we've had a revolution.
Well, the permaculture revolution can solve that. But
I'm fine with that. No, but I don't have those answers.
We're not going to explore that right now. Yeah. I just want to know as well for this episode that we acknowledge that there is a material limit and that there is also an influence when we on this that drives this war. Yeah. The reason why I'm pointing that out, and the reason why I think this is a factor we're not talking about here, but I'm bringing up, is because I think this is just a thought that came to me as I was listening to a few podcasts and I was trying to make sense of what's happening. I think that's why with what happened with, I forget the blockage or the
Strait of Hormuz.
Yes, thank you. I think what happened is that I think it was strategic of Trump, and it's not just the Epstein files that we're trying to cover it up. I hear liberals talking about that. This is about. I think this has been in the making. That it makes more sense than to go after Venezuela with their oil reserves before you go to the Middle East. So you go to Venezuela in January. You make sure you tell your Mexican cartels who's daddy. And then after that, you tell Cuba, you're going to cut off our relationships with Russia because I'm not going to have these threats in the small island right by my shores of Florida. So therefore, you tackle these three areas, and then suddenly, bam, you go into the Middle East. Before, like, why would that order not exist? Is my So if you're going to have this oil issue in the Middle East, you might as well have your resource in your backyard in the Americas, whilst at the same time cutting off the Americas from China and Russia. I mean, these are the thoughts that came to my mind.
And to me, that is also evidence that this is not somehow Israel dragging the U.S. This is the U.S. carrying out a plan with many stages.
Good.
All right. Anything else? I've learned a lot. Well, that does it for this week's episode. Right. Let's see. Okay. What's Left is a weekly political podcast. Last channel, challenging the mainstream left. We post information about our topics and our guests on the episode notes, wherever you found this episode, or on our blog at what'sleftpodcast.com. You can find past episodes to this podcast, last channel there, and connect with us. I remind folks, if you like anything you've heard here, please subscribe, rate, review, turn on your notifications to any of our platforms, or the Spotify, iTunes, Podcast, BitChute, Odyssey, YouTube, Rumble, or Telegram. You can always find our blog and any of those links in the episode notes wherever you found this episode. If you would like to give us feedback about something you've heard or suggest something for us to cover, contact us through our blog and Andy will answer. Thank you both for being patient with me and having this conversation that I think is timely and important. I learned a lot, and we will have more further discussions, especially with our previous guest who has been fam, and I look forward to that discussion. Thank you everyone who listens to this episode. Check us out next time. Ciao.
Are you trying to accuse me of floating off into the air?
No.
Oh, you mean like talking about Libya specifically?
Right, like
would be
that's what I mean.
yeah.
Like everything becomes like just everything. It's just unhinged.
Becomes
But-
virtual.
Right, and in
becomes
fact,
virtual.
it is virtual. It literally is virtual. So
Yeah. Right.
anyway, we aren't even talking. It's 8:33.
We better go.
We didn't even get to walk with our dog. Sorry, Brandy. That's Eduardo's fault, though.
Oh my gosh, me.
Yeah. So she's really mad at you right now. But I'm going to calm her down so that she's not, like she can't talk to me now.
I feel like you just made her mad with that. She wasn't before.
Michael,
I was like, now I'm mad at you too. And
that's how things work around here. Yeah. He's married. He knows.
also, it's the classic sexist trope of the woman being angry.
Oh, he's accusing me of being sexist too.
No, just the trope.
So remember,
Brandy,
One could read
Brandy
it that
demands
way.
that you take that back.
did you watch the other episode where what was it? It was the one that you forced me to read, and Eddie was like bossing me around, and Kenny was like,
Dude,
"What? You're being kind of."
Blake, if you're in trouble.
I remember.
Well, it hurts. It hurts. The truth will set you free, but it will also crush your ego.
Yeah. It's cool, man.
Yeah.